Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of the Majestic Bean channel, where we make coffee simple again. In this episode today, we'll be having some fun because we are going to prepare some espresso coffee for the first time on our new machine. Before we start with that though, I need to introduce two new pieces of equipment. The first one is the jam funnel, which will help us put all the coffee grounds inside the coffee basket like this. And the second piece of equipment is a magnetic kitchen timer. I got this one from Kmart for $7 and it's very nice because it's compact and I can time my shots easily. The reason why I got this timer though is because the other kitchen scale that I have is too big to fit under the machine. This episode consists of 5 different elements: the dose, the grind, the tamp, the yield, and extraction time. All of these 5 elements are very important in order to make delicious espresso coffee. The dose is where we decide how many grams of coffee we would fit in our coffee basket. Now, the dose depends on the size of our coffee basket. For example, I have tested and discovered that in this double basket from the Gaggia Classic, I can fit a minimum of 16 grams of coffee and a maximum of 20 grams of coffee. Everyone at home can test and see how many grams of coffee they can fit in their basket. And when I say that, I mean the minimum and the maximum dose they could use. So first thing we need to do is remove the coffee handle from the coffee machine and wipe it clean. Then we take anything to measure the coffee beans. Today I'll be making 2 espressos, so I'll use 20 grams as our coffee dose. We take the 20 grams of coffee and we put it in the grinder. I already know that for this dose I need to grind on the setting number 9, but that would all depend on the type of grinder you use, so you would have to discover that previously. This is where our jam funnel comes in handy. I put it like this in the handle, and then I take the ground coffee and just put it inside. Now the interesting part begins. So I just swirl around until all the coffee fits neatly in the basket. Take it out. All I need to do is just gently tap the coffee grounds so they're redistributed nicely. Then put it on the mat and use a nice even tap. Clean it up. And lock the handle in. After that, I take my little scale over here and take 2 espresso cups. I tear the scale to 0 and then I press the timer at the same time as I press the brew button. The 2 most common mistakes when dosing coffee is underdosing and overdosing. We know when we have underdosed because the coffee puck will have the consistency of a slushy. The easiest way to recognize when we have overdosed is when the tamper does not fit the coffee basket, and also when we cannot fit the group handle in the group head. Let's move on to the grind. The easiest way to determine the grind for espresso is to look at our numbers on the grinder. The smaller numbers on the grinder are usually used for grinding espresso coffee, meaning the numbers from 3 until 10. For example, on my grinder, I'm using the numbers 4 or 9 depending on the dose. If I'm dosing 16 grams of coffee, then I'm using the number 4. If I'm dosing 20 grams of coffee, I'm using the number 9 or 10. This means that the smaller the dose, the finer you need the grind. And the opposite, the bigger the dose, the coarser you need to grind. Another way of seeing if you've ground too fine is when extracting espresso. If the coffee is coming out too slow, then you've probably ground too fine. And opposite, if the coffee is coming out of the spouts too abruptly and it's splashing everywhere, you've probably ground too coarse. When grinding for espresso, it's important to get the ground coffee right. If you ground too fine, ground coffee will feel like talcum powder. If you ground too coarse, it will feel like rock salt. Properly ground espresso coffee feels like table salt. Let's talk about tamping. There are two things to remember when tamping. First thing is to tamp level. Second thing is to use consistent pressure. The most common mistakes that people do when tamping is having an unlevel tamp, meaning one side of the tamper is lower than the other one. Another mistake is a wrong tamping posture, meaning they're not putting their own body weight on it, resulting in a different tamping pressure every time they use it. Let's talk about the fourth part of making espresso, which is the yield. The yield is the liquid amount of coffee we are extracting from the ground coffee. The easiest way to measure the yield is by using a coffee scale while you are making espresso. The rule of thumb for the yield of espresso is getting twice the amount of the coffee grounds you've put in the basket. Meaning, if you've put 20 grams of coffee in the basket, you would be extracting 40 grams of liquid coffee. It depends on people's palate as well. If you want your coffee to be a bit stronger, you would decrease the yield, meaning you would extract less coffee. If you would like the coffee to taste more mellow, you would increase the yield, meaning you would go up. The most common mistake that people do when it comes to the yield is people not using a coffee scale. This is one of the most important equipment that you could use for making espresso, so I would highly recommend having a little scale to measure the yield. The fifth and final part of making espresso is the extraction time. Extraction time is the amount of time it takes for the water to pass through the coffee grounds to get the final product, which is the espresso. A common misconception that people have when it comes to extraction times is that a shot should take 30 seconds, which is not true, because the extraction time depends on the dose. The lower the dose, the lower the extraction time, and the opposite. The bigger the dose, the bigger the extraction time. This means if I have a dose of 16 grams, it shouldn't take me the same amount of time to extract it as if I would have a 20-gram dose. For my coffee machine and my grinder, when I'm dosing 16 grams in my basket, I try to extract the espresso in around 23 to 24 seconds. When I'm dosing 20 grams of coffee, I'm aiming at around 28 to 29 seconds. The most important piece of equipment that everyone should have when it comes to extraction times is a kitchen timer, or you could simply use the stopwatch on your phone. Just remember to press the start button on your timer simultaneously as the brew button on your machine. Extraction time depends on the coarseness of your grind. If you're trying to slow down the extraction time, then you would grind finer, and the opposite. If you're trying to speed it up a bit, then you would grind coarser. Now let's put everything that we learned today into practice and see how we go. That's all for today, guys. Hopefully these tips were very helpful. Just make sure not to change 2 elements at a time. So whenever you're making coffee at home and you're trying to change something, make sure it's only 1 element out of the 5. In the next episode, we'll be learning how to froth milk like the pros. So until then, stay safe and we'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the bell button. While you're here, check out our social media for more coffee content.